What's a small, seemingly insignificant decision you've made that ended up having a huge impact on your life? Story 1. I went to prison for a robbery. I did it. I was a heroin addict. After almost 5 years in, at a work center, I got a write-up which would make me stay in for a few months longer. The warden offered a deal if I would paint a mural at a local high school of their mascot, they'd forgive the write-up. I had always been good at drawing. They knew that, which is why they asked, but had never done a mural. I figured out how to scale it up in my head, and I did it. I got out about 6 months later and made it my career. I'm now married, happy, and fully booked until summer of next year for work, owning my own business. In September, I will have been out for 10 years. I also hid my initials in the high school mascot mural. Did you ever thank that warden, who was obviously a decent man? I have not, but I should. Please thank him. I recently had someone randomly reach out to me through Facebook for being a great employer to her troubled teen daughter nearly 10 years ago. I was in tears. Appreciation is a powerful thing. I don't even remember the kid. I realized this last year, that the thing missing in this world is adequate affirmation. I've started making an active effort, and I really think people are noticing. I'm also trying to now train my workers in affirmation, confirmation, proper constructive criticism, etc. I've started trying to see the world as what I would want, and then applying it to my actions. I would cry if someone told me that I was a good employer to their kid 10 years ago. So I try to make sure I do those exact types of things. Who knew the golden rule could be so simple? Story 2. Number 1, I had a blind date for coffee with someone. She just wasn't my type at all. But I figured, hey, what could it hurt to have a nice conversation? 2 weeks later, she invited me to a party she was having. I had nothing to do, so I said, why not? I met my future wife there. Never turned down an opportunity to meet someone or to have a conversation. Because, hey, you never know. Number 2, about 10 years ago, I was working in advertising. I wrote something really nice for a nonprofit. The AE I worked with said, "Wow, this is nice. Ever thought of writing a novel?" Every story has a backstory. When I was in college, I was an English major. One of our classmates was a total bully, the kind who smoked clove cigarettes, faked fainting spells, and just trashed everyone. I mentioned in conversation that I wouldn't mind writing a novel. She heard it and said, "Yeah, don't quit your day job, whatever that will be." I have no idea why that embedded in my head, but it did. Fast forward to 10 years ago, I said, why not? My first novel was crap, but my second novel went to a development editor who, after a couple of passes, said, "This is one of my most beautiful things I've ever read." She's now introducing me to agents and is shepherding me through the writing of a third novel. Getting a novel published, especially if it's not by-the-numbers genre fiction, is a torturous path. But if I ever get published, I will send a copy of it to that witch from college with a big F.U. next to my autograph. And I'll send a nice note of thanks to the AE who encouraged me to start on this journey. Never give up, guys. Giving up is the death of the soul. Story 3. I broke my hand playing soccer in high school, fell, landed awkwardly. Consequently, all I could do for gym class was walk a loop around the track the entire class period until my cast came off. A girl had a cast on her broken fingers. Hers accidentally got closed in a car door. So she walked with me every day, and we talked and hit it off. 20-plus years later, we are married with a couple of kids. I met my wife in AP Bio, and we just happened to hit it off because we both like Star Wars. A mutual friend said, "You both like Star Wars? You two are going to get married." We did, nearly 15 years later. Back in the day, I had a profile on Lava Life, and one of the things that it said was that I was kind of a nerd who really liked Star Wars. A woman messaged me. After some conversation, one of the things that came out was that she had never actually stayed awake for an entire Star Wars movie. She still really has no interest in Star Wars. I know this because we've been married for 13 years and have 2 children. The funny thing is, I have a lot less interest in Star Wars now due to media oversaturation. This is freaking sweet. It's so freaking sweet. I think it gave me diabetes. Story 4. Entered the green card lottery. Friend was trying to figure out how to do it, so I downloaded the instructions and completed an application to show them how. Since it was easier than asking them for all their info, I made a dummy application using my own info. When I was done, I thought, might as well, and dropped my application into the outgoing mail. Then I forgot all about it. I was highly confused when, nearly a year later, I got a letter from the State Department. I've been in the U.S. for 20 years now, married, kids, the whole thing. Biggest change I ever made, and it was just a random 15-minute thing I did to help a buddy. Well, what about your friend? He never made it. He was understandably a little jealous when I told him, but saw the funny side. What a great friend. Similar-ish story. My buddy wanted a job where you had to go take a test for. He didn't want to go take it alone, so I went along and took it too. I had never in my wildest dreams or nightmares thought about this type of job and was completely there to support him. I passed and he didn't. Spent 5 years at that job and made some great friends there. Story 5. On a night out, I went to Burger King and at the last second decided to get chicken nuggies with my burger instead of chips. I ate the burger but didn't feel like the nuggets by this point and wished I'd gotten chips instead. So I asked the person opposite me on the bus if he wanted them. My exact words were, "Hey lad, do you want my chicken nuggets?" He said yes, and we got talking. That was 16 years ago, and now we are married with a beautiful daughter. My mental image is that of a British punk girl saying this to a regular-looking dude, and it's both funny and cute. I'm glad to see that you guys are so happy together. Not punk, sorry, but very indie at the time. And yes, my husband was a regular, but very handsome dude, who had also already eaten 20 nuggets from McDonald's at this point, but he said, if a gorgeous blonde girl on the bus offers you nuggets, you bloody take them. He missed his stop because we were talking and went to get off the bus, but I said he didn't have my number yet, and for some reason, he stayed on until my stop and then took my number. Good job, really. Story 6. On Friday, the 1st of August, 1997, I was going to go straight home from work, but a colleague talked me into going to the pub for a quick pint. 2 hours, a couple of shared joints, and 4 pints later, I got my push bike and made it about a quarter of the way home before coming off at the bottom of a steep hill and nearly getting killed. I was supposed to be going on a residential course the following Monday, but I was in the hospital. I had to rebook onto another sitting, 5 weeks later and 300 miles away. And that's where I met my wife, who was living overseas at the time, but by coincidence was planning to move back to where she grew up, literally walking distance from where I was living at the time. Not only did the accident cause me to meet the woman currently sitting next to me on the sofa, but forced me to completely reassess my life. I got my drinking and drug abuse under control and have since gone sober, and got me off the self-destructive path I was on. Story 7. My new desk job's internet filter stopped me from going to my favorite websites. It didn't block BoardGameGeek.com, however, so I ended up spending my downtime at work researching board games, game designers, and publishers. I read about a game I couldn't find a copy of, and put together a version of how I thought it might play. Later, I found out I was totally wrong about how that game worked, but I preferred my version of the game. Yada yada yada, I'm an award-winning board game designer now. It's about cones. No joke, the episode in which Ben first shares cones of Dunshire is the most accurate representation of the experience of hobby board game design I've ever seen. "Oh, this is nothing, I'll just throw all of this away," is something I've said multiple times to my wife. Story 8. Worked in a kindergarten during my gap years between high school and university. I didn't even plan to go at the time. A kid with speech and social issues happened to take a special liking to me, resulting in me agreeing to work closely with his speech therapist, despite only being the teacher's assistant. This reignited my interest in language and made me apply to be a linguistics major. My high school grades made it a long shot, but it turns out that every year they tested out a new system of accepting 50% of students based on motivational essays to try to combat a high dropout rate in linguistics. I made it in on that. They ditched it the next year because it didn't work. I now have a master's in language psychology and start teaching at the same university this semester. If I had applied literally any other year, my chances would have been like lottery odds. Story 9. Broke up with my high school sweetheart before college because I didn't want a long-distance relationship. I would come to regret it and miss her miserably over the next 5 years, even while dating other people. I would stalk her MySpace pics. Yes, I'm that old. And she just got more and more beautiful every day. One day, my friends were grabbing a bite to eat, then heading to the local mall. They invited me, but I wasn't feeling it, and absolutely refused to go. They managed to talk me into it. Long story short, I bumped into that old flame at the Sunglass Hut, and the rest is history. Happily married for 12 years, with a great life and 2 amazing kids. I always think about what would have happened, or not happened, if I had the will to say no to my friends just one more time. It just seems so improbable to me how my life turned on that one decision. Story 10. I chose to be nice to everyone in high school, even the kids people thought were weird. Messed up my life pretty bad 10 years ago, and recently got a call asking if I wanted to train as a software developer by one of those kids. I was frying chicken at a gas station for scraps. Dude told me he remembered me being smart and into that stuff, and knew I could learn fast. Thanks for all the stories and responses. Kinda makes me tear up seeing everything y'all had to say. Life is hard sometimes, so just be excellent to each other. You never know what kind of impact you can have. Hell yeah, mate. Hope you're enjoying life more these days. It's going all right, all things considered. Story 11. Was talking about communication encryption on a conference panel moderated by my friend, and I gave an example about unsecured Russian comms from the Russo-Japanese War of 1904 to 1905. I was a full-time programmer back then. After the conference ended, my friend came to me and said, "Hey, I just started a new magazine. Would you write an article about the Russo-Japanese War for me?" Yeah, sure, why not? 10 years later, about 1,000 articles later, and 8 books later, I am somehow a fairly known author, journalist, blogger, and someone started a check Wikipedia entry about me. Still do some programming in PHP, Python, and C++ though. Story 12. Me and 2 other coworkers decided to grab some dinner after our shift. One ended up canceling, so I thought my other coworker would cancel too. We were both hungry, so we decided to still grab dinner together. We'd been coworkers for over a year and have always gotten along, but this dinner truly felt like a first date. It was so enjoyable, and we talked so much that we didn't realize the restaurant had been closed and that the workers had been cleaning up around us. Servers were too nice to interrupt our conversation. Him and I ended up falling in love soon after that. Been together for over 6 years and wouldn't change a thing. Story 13. Was at a conference and stepped outside for a smoke, bumped into a friend of mine who introduced me to the man he was walking with. That man encouraged me to apply for an opening in his office, and 6 months later, he hired me. It was the job that jump-started my career, changing my trajectory, and all because of a bad habit. Do you still smoke? Thankfully, no. Dropped it a few years ago at the start of COVID lockdown. Think of the jobs you could have had by now. Story 14. Scratched myself up in the field in ROTC training due to my own stupidity. Debated whether to go to the medical tent since it was super minor. I ultimately did, and the cot next to me was a cadet from another school that was in a unit more in line with my career goals. The cadet got me an interview with the commander, and when I graduated and was commissioned, I was assigned there. In the first few months, I met my now wife, who was also new to the unit. Nearly 2 decades of marriage later, we are both retiring and traveling the world together. Story 15. Took the wrong train in a new city to a job, a minimum wage job that I didn't want, but needed at the time. Asked a random guy for directions when phone GPS still kinda sucked. He happened to be going in the same general direction. We rode a train together and nerded out on films we were into. He was an aspiring filmmaker, very beginnings of aspirations, and I was just a film nerd without any post-high school education or thought of breaking into the industry. We ended up becoming roommates and collaborators eventually. Sold our first film to IFC like 2 years ago. Story 16. I was flying to Costa Rica to go backpacking south from there. My sister told me to fly into Guatemala. I had to see it. So I did, and here I am, still 10 years later, with a son and a life I never imagined. Guatemala is a hidden gem. My mom goes there every year. I have a friend who winters there and has for some decades. He says it is not so hidden as a gem anymore, especially post-COVID. Story 17. I had just moved to Florida from Pennsylvania with my brother, and we decided to grab lunch at a restaurant we'd never been to before. Got to chatting with the waitress, explained we were new, etc. She brought over her manager, and he offered me a job on the spot. Met a cute bartender, and 10 years later, we are married with a 5-year-old. Live in a big new city together, just jumped on the gravy train of life head first by picking that place to eat at. Story 18. I was with my mom at a bar in Paris. She was a pain in the butt about what specifically she wanted to eat, so we left without finishing the drinks. 10 minutes after, the bar got shot by terrorists. 2015? I doubt it. That would be a lot of terrorists. Story 19. I had a blog where I couldn't figure out some HTML code, so I emailed the blog of another person who had figured it out, and they sent me the code. They lived about 1,000 miles from me and had never spoken before. 4 years later, we're married, bought a house, and have a child together. So you stole the code, house, and child? Story 20. I was doing online dating with no success, and I was ready to give up. I almost canceled my date just out of pessimism, but figured it was already scheduled, so whatever. I'll just go, and if it doesn't work out, I'll just take a break from dating. The date lasted about 8 hours, and 15 years later, we're still together. 8 hours and 15 years? Frick, that's a long date. Story 21. I took a random part-time job out of desperation, making wooden snowboard and skateboard racks. 12 years later, I'm deeply embedded in the woodworking industry and found a career. Didn't see that coming. It's destined. Story 22. A kid's birthday party I wasn't planning to go to. I changed my mind at the last second, met my husband there. Just saying yes to invitations can unexpectedly change your life for the better. Look at Mr. Sociable here, getting invitations. Canceling my plans. Story 23. Playing World of Warcraft, I picked a druid, ended up loving playing a healer, decided to become a nurse in real life. Still like being on the healing team. Good thing you didn't pick a warlock. Story 24. I took a job in an emergency room doing insurance paperwork. I thought, okay, but what happens before they get to the hospital? That exposure led to a career as a first responder. I never would have imagined I would be helping people in emergencies by doing it every day for decades. Story 25. 2015 in Ukraine. Went to shop to buy a bottle of water. No gas, no flavor, just a simple water bottle. Ended up getting married with the cashier who saw me a few times and was always curious to know what the frick I'm doing in that part of the country. Story 26. Took an art appreciation course in college. Had a career that had nothing to do with art, but I've spent at least part of every holiday since then touring museums in different world cities and various states and provinces in the US and Canada. It's given me so much enjoyment in life. Story 27. Had dropped out of college and then decided to return. Applied for housing, and the housing office gave me the choice between 2 rooms. I chose one and ended up dating the resident assistant in my hall. We married 3 years later and just celebrated our 26th anniversary. Story 28. Watched a beginner Blender tutorial series. Pretty sure that played a large part of why I got hired at my current company. And I just received a promotion after less than a year with a $10,000 a year raise that involves me using Blender to make beauty renders for marketing material. Story 29. Went for a jog, even though I didn't want to. Ended up meeting a cute woman who was a bit of a motor mouth, but we had a lot in common. We ended up dating for about 4 years. We wanted different things and ended it, but she's still a fantastic friend. Story 30. I'm terrible at Judo and dislocated someone's shoulder. Felt guilty, so decided to learn first aid and found a course 40 minutes from where I live. Met my wife there, and I often think, what if I didn't slip up whilst training? Story 31. I took an antibiotic for a possible infection and was perfectly healthy before. Ended up with permanent nerve damage at 24 years old, and it turns out I never had an infection to begin with. Story 32. Accepted an invite to some dude's team on Overwatch, a video game. Now I live on the opposite side of the country with him, and we have 2 dogs and a Costco membership. The Costco membership means you guys are serious. Story 33. Decided to relax my leg while trying to kick the ball, missed the ball, and messed my knee up. 2 years later, it still hurts. Thank you for sharing a depressing answer. Everything here is very inspiring. Story 34. Grabbed a beer instead of going home early. I got offered a job when I was struggling to find a first job. Story 35. I volunteered feeding the homeless at a local church years ago. Now I'm in a senior position addressing homelessness for the city of Los Angeles. You sure got your hands full. Good luck. Story 36. Nearly didn't go on a blind date, but he was my soulmate. I knew in a blink when I met him. It's been 33 years, and I still miss him. Story 37. Checking out a new tea shop that opened in my area, I became friends with the owner, and she told me about a coding boot camp. And less than a year later, I had a great new career. Story 38. Getting a cat. I feel like she's done a lot of positive things to my psyche, against my loneliness, and also helped my mother. Cat sure turned a home into a comfy place. Story 39. Decided to work out again. I'm loving it, and I'm so much happier. Please leave your stories in the comments. I'd love to make a video of them in the future. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe.